But yes, certainly councils that actually are well run should get on building houses.
Anna Minton, you've written a lot about housing, big capital, what is London for, who is London for, your book. What is your thought about what Tony Devenish
Well, I
says?
mean, you know, you only need to look around the London skyline, other views apart from this one, and there's construction going up all over London. We are building lots and lots of homes, but who are they for? You know, they're for billionaire investors, they're for, you know, offshore investors. They're not for Londoners, and they're certainly not affordable. And even the 25% affordable housing, which is included in those developments, that was actually redefined by the Conservatives to mean up to 80% of market value or market rent. So when you look at a 2-bedroom apartment on one of these new developments, say Elephant Park, which replaced the Haygate estate in Elephant and Castle, that'll be between £750,000 to £1 million. The affordable component there is actually 80% of that.
How
is that affordable?
Issue,
You can argue that, but I don't agree with you on your first point. It's only 3% of housing is what you call oligarch housing or similar. A lot of housing
Well, if
is
I just
affordable.
take you back to that development in Elephant and
That's one
Castle.
development.
Well, the whole first phase of Elephant Park has been sold to foreign investors, and there is actually a huge amount of that sort of thing going on, of flipping, where apartments are sold directly to Southeast Asia investor markets without even hitting London
What you're
markets.
missing, if I can say, is actually when you do sell to an overseas investor, there's still the Section 106 money, as you well know, and that goes to affordable housing. So if you build housing for all
housing,
sorts of
which
people,
is 80% of market rent. I mean, how's that affordable?
For all sorts of people, you will be able to actually get social housing as well.
Okay,
if you
Tony,
stop the market, you won't.
Just 1 second. Ilhan Yunus, you're 17 years old. You were brought up in social housing. What do you say to Tony Devenish?
Well, I agree with what Anna's saying about this, you know, new homes being built. They're not affordable. If you look at places like Westminster, the rent, £665. It's only when you get to up north, such as places like Nottingham, £110. It's like she said, who is London for? People like myself, after I leave university, am I expected to stay up north, or can I come back down here and buy a house?
And what has your experience of social housing been like?
My experience has been awful. I mean, I grew up in a low-rise tower block, and I grew up in cramped conditions. I grew up sharing a bed with 2 of my sisters, with my 2 brothers sharing a bed in the same room. So we're very cramped. We lived in damp conditions. I have a sister who has asthma. It was awful, bidding for years and years, and only after a while could we move.
Can I just
bring in Kate Macintosh really quickly, because you're an architect who started your career with a very great vision in the 60s for good quality social housing that wasn't supposed to be the experience of people like Ilhan.
I'd like to remind everybody that Britain is the 5th richest country in the world. I think it's totally disgusting that with the withdrawal and reduction in the assistance for rents, which is money which is all being moved from the public sector to the private sector, that it's predicted that 300,000 children will be evicted across this country. In other countries, they have a different priority. They realise that the future of their country and the standing of their nation depends on the next generation. In Norway, they have a ministry for housing, and all policies which are proposed have to be passed by this Ministry for Housing as to what the effects on children will be. The fact that rough sleepers, for instance, the number of rough sleepers has virtually doubled in 6 years.
I mean, Emma Dent Code, you know, Labour's record on building housing was pretty poor too.
Well, I agree with you, actually, but it has to be said that if they'd started building at that point when all the houses, you know, before the decent homes, if they'd started building and left their homes completely unrefurbished and not renovated, people would have complained about that. So I agree that they should have started building much sooner. But the amount of money they put into decent homes made a lot of people's lives much better for the quality of life. But I want to pick up on something that Tony said, if I may, about Section 106 payments. In this borough, and a lot of people have been doing research on it over the last few weeks, but I've been keeping an eye on this for many, many years. In this borough, they do not use Section 106 funds to build homes for social rent. So they use it to refurbish and to do a twiddle here and to put some homes in a garage, but they are not building homes for social rent with that money. And they should have to. They should have to.
There is a real issue, isn't there, about developers promising social housing, affordable homes, and then going back on that promise right at the last minute. That is an issue, isn't it?
Well, the market
and
has
the
to be able
government
to
has
work, and if the
invited
market
them.
works by actually making sure that we sell as many houses as possible, then you'll get more social housing built.
work.
If you just have a centralised plan system, you won't build
But the
anything.
market
Doesn't work.
totally doesn't work.
£3
It has
billion
never
in
worked.
London.
The
Mr.
private
Khan's got the money
sector
to build.
Has never built the amount of housing that we need.
The GLA is committed
The
to
private
build
sector
housing.
has built about the same amount of housing every year since the Second World War. It hasn't changed.
It's gone up and
What's
down, actually.
well, roughly about 150,000 homes a year. Hasn't really changed. What has changed is we're no longer building any public housing and hardly any housing association housing. I just, very quick point, I wanted you ask what will happen to you when you graduate from Leeds? And I wanted to just pick up on what we were discussing. Westminster Council's policy, I'm afraid, is that for people in social housing who are not in priority need, the policy is to actually send them to other cities. That is now the council's official policy.
That is a myth, actually. We're not sending lots of people anywhere else.
We've
got to prioritise
that's in the
people,
planning
though.
document.
Things are in documents, whether they actually happen or not.
They are happening.
I mean, they're going to Margate. I mean, I work with Citizens Advice for over 12 years with people who are homeless and selling temporary accommodation in Birmingham, Margate, Moorgate, and different
Well,
places.
that's Labour
I'm a bit
authorities.
surprised.
That's Labour authorities as well as
No, I'm
Conservative
a bit
authorities.
surprised.
The question is that right? Is it, in your view, right that an area like this could say, you know, property's too expensive, you know, we can house you in social housing, but you have to move? Is that just fact? Is that just how life should work?
Well, it's up to every single council to make the priorities effectively. But what we need to do is build more homes. We can all agree, if we build more homes, we'll make the problem less. If we don't build more homes, it's going to get worse.
It doesn't work like that.
I have a solution. I mean, you can regulate the private rented sector. If you don't build enough, regulate the private rented sector so people have a choice.
More regulation equals less jobs and less homes.
Well, I think
not true. In Germany, they only allow the increase of rent in line with inflation, and they insist that the minimum tenancy must be for at least 3 years, so that in consequence, the amount of public money which goes to subsidise the private sector in Germany is virtually flatlining, whereas in this country...
And so's housing inflation.
Well,
It just hasn't gone up.
Well, I think there's an issue there. If we're talking about not building enough houses, and actually that's half the issue. Yes, there are not enough houses, but there's also a massive issue with how people in social housing are now perceived.
Yes.
You know, you know, it's been said before that residents of the Lancaster West estate, I grew up on that estate, where they would feel they've been treated like second-class citizens. But also, there are people who do own their own houses, who are referred to as the middle, and they are squeezed. And what's being said to them is the reason you cannot afford to live in these areas is because the people who are in social housing, or the people who are poorer than you, or less socially economically well off as you, are in these places. So it creates a whole divide, and it makes people fight amongst themselves because over space that actually is for everyone.
I mean, would you pay more tax for more houses to be built?
Yes,
Absolutely.
yes.
Well, we should
If it
have a
actually
land
went on
value
housing.
tax for starters.
But some
we
people should pay tax. Some
No,
people
absolutely.
don't pay tax at all. Those people should pay tax. I'd happily pay more.
And what about the land value tax? Why do you think that would be
Well,
helpful?
I mean, the planning system was designed with a land value tax built in it. Lots of European countries have it. They even have it in America, Australia, Hong Kong. You know, not exactly bastions of socialism. It's a way of damping down this out-of-control speculative casino market. That's why we've got this housing crisis, because the market is totally dysfunctional. So market answers can never be the solution.
Now, in Cardiff, I understand they have suspended the right to buy. Isn't that one way of making sure that the stock remains as buoyant as possible?
We've done that in Scotland and in Wales, and I wouldn't support that because the public want the right to buy. That's why Mrs Thatcher won all those elections. It's that simple.
So
you can't keep telling the public.
Well,
can't tell them. I don't believe
of those right-to-buy properties are now owned by private landlords, professional private landlords who rent them out at 3 and 4 times the price.
And lots of people from low incomes got onto the housing ladder because of that. It's very good for middle-class property people in London to say that, but the reality is people got on the market for the first time. People I know from working-class backgrounds.
That perhaps wasn't a bad thing.
What percentage of people from working class backgrounds?
Except that the terms under which Right to Buy was launched prevented the local authorities from using the capital receipts for building more housing. And even if they had been allowed to do it, because of the public subsidy that went into allowing Right to Buy, they wouldn't have been able to build like for like. And I disagree with you on the situation in Scotland. In Scotland, they have built in the last 10 years as much social housing as the whole of the rest of UK put together. And the average Scot now has more disposable income than the average throughout the rest of UK, precisely because the cost of housing as a proportion of income is much lower